Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today we are trying something new on the podcast. It's our first podcast threesome. We've actually got three of us on today, all remotely, so we're not quite sure how that's going to work out, but we'll see how it goes. And it's great to have Jake back, but also we've got Jay Ryan as well. Hello, Jay.
Hi.
So, as we said last week on last week's podcast, Jake was talking about the Salcantay trip in more detail, and he alluded to the fact that things didn't quite go to plan on this one. And as Jake said, it was nothing from our perspective. We just want to get that bit out there before we start. But the trip did not get off to the best start. And we kind of wanted to discuss that today because obviously it's great having a podcast where we give inspiration for people and say how amazing these places are and you should all go traveling. But I think it's really important that we also prepare people that things don't always go to plan and there can be hiccups on the way. And I remember it happening because it was about 11 o'clock at night in the UK. And I had an email come in from into our operations inbox, which I've got oversight on, and it just said your flight is delayed. And I knew Jake would be in Miami at that point, so I was like, I just sent Jake a quick WhatsApp and said, "How delayed are you going to be with the group?" And the response back was, "We're fucked." And that was the message that I got back. And I was like, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm just literally about to go to bed. And this doesn't sound good. So anyway, Jake, let's take us through the we're fucked bit and what actually happened on your very overstated, very long flight to Lima.
Well, it's always really funny because I think as a leader, you always aim to kind of go for that analogy of like a duck on water. And, you know, the legs are kicking really, really quickly, but nobody sees that because you try and stay nice and calm on the top. And obviously at the time, people are saying, you know, oh, what's going to happen? We're caught up in all these delays. And I'll explain why that happened in a minute. But my response was actually really optimistic and was like, do you know what? If we miss this flight, it's not a problem. We'll get on the next one. Actually, it works in our favor because everyone's a little bit hungry. We'll get some time to have some food. And then obviously the thing that most people normally don't find out about is that then the conversations between us were a little bit more transparent and kind of in one direction. But we do try and keep those all hidden away. So I think this podcast is really good. It's quite revealing to kind of talk about it. It's a bit like the elephant in the room with travel. I think everyone likes to share the pictures of when things go really, really well. But actually, by talking about things that make adventure travel adventurous, that's kind of where we learn the most. And that's what makes it interesting. So basically what had happened was I would say the delays started at the very beginning of the trip with my journey there and the M25 being completely gridlocked. Jay had the same experience coming up. In fact, we're kind of keeping in contact, everybody in the group, and just saying, unfortunately, everyone's going to be a little bit late coming into Heathrow. When we got to Heathrow, typically there were only a few of the self-check-in scanners working, and the people that were tasked with dealing with that were not being the most helpful. Is probably the polite way to put it. So that kind of slowed things down at the beginning and made it a little bit stressful. But we got onto our flight and we then flew directly to Miami. We got into Miami about 15 or 20 minutes after we were scheduled to arrive. So they had made up a lot of the time whilst we were flying, which they quite often do. But when we got there, we got taken to a slightly different section of immigration. And I later found out that it's where they send any delayed flights. Now, the reasoning behind that is so that delayed flights don't get caught up with all of the other flights coming in. The only problem was there were 4 delayed flights at the same time that they'd all sent down to this one area of immigration, and only 2 people on the immigration desk. So at that point, when I'm looking at the sea of people in front of me, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be really tight. Like, we've got approximately 3 hours before our next flight, which is normally more than enough time. And if you do any longer than that, then we tend to feel that it kind of puts the trip into a little bit of a negative starting point because people have got too long to wait at the airport.
Well, I think the thing to say there, Jake, is that, like, we get a little bit of kickback from people sometimes on flight prices, and obviously this was a connecting flight, and I mean, you'll explain this a bit later on, but when you were looking at booking flights, you need to book, if you're booking a flight from London to Lima, for example, or London to Kathmandu, like, you book it as one complete booking and make sure that the airline is taking responsibility for that booking. And we had booked this trip with British Airways, but obviously they are linked to American Airlines. So the flight was booked through BA all the way through. Whereas sometimes people might go, well, I'll book 2 separate flights because it works out cheaper to not have it done under one booking. And that generally is more expensive. But obviously we don't do that because ultimately, if you miss your connecting flight, it then becomes your problem. And obviously, for our perspective, we don't want that hassle. If we miss our connecting flight, we want the airline to deal with that problem, and that's why we book it in that way. So carry on.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that is worth noting because I was fully expecting that if anything was to happen, because our flight had been delayed coming in and it was all on a linked booking, and we booked the entire way through, that everything was going to be sorted. So I saw this sea of people, and we started working our way through the queue. And again, everyone's thinking, "Wow, this is quite a serious queue that we've got going on." And I'm thinking, okay, we should get there. And I can see us coming up to what I thought was the end, or just going to be around that corner. And Jay knows what I'm talking about. We all queued up in this long straight line. There was maybe a couple of hundred people, but it was moving-ish. And I thought, okay, well, they're all turning around this corner. That's where the desks are. And then we got to that corner, and I just saw another room. And there were like 3 times as many people. And that's the point where everyone went, okay, we've got some serious problems. So I spoke to a member of the security team who was there, and I said, excuse me, we've got a connecting flight. And I did exaggerate a little bit. I said that it was, basically within the hour. And I think we had about an hour and a half, hour 45. But, basically saying we've got a connecting flight soon. And her response was really, really blunt. And she went, you're just going to have to wait like everybody else. And I said, okay, but can I ask, is everybody here, are they all connecting, or are some of them like going through and then departing the airport? And she went, everybody comes through here. I said, okay, I fully understand that, but we're going to miss our flight. Is there anything that you can do to get us like through and on the connecting flight? And she just went, sir, you're going to have to wait just like everybody else. And it was really difficult in that situation because there's only so much that I can do as a leader in that situation as a representative. So it's quite difficult. There were other people that seemed to be moving through the queue. So it was commented on by a few people around us. Oh, well, they're getting to move out the queue. They get to move out the queue. But unfortunately, I wasn't having any luck with that. That's the point where I then saw that the notification came through, or a little bit further on, sorry, it came through that our flight had been delayed. And at that point, everybody had gone from, we're going to miss our flight, to, hooray, it's delayed. Like, we've got a little bit more time to make it. But we just stayed in that queue, and it didn't move, and it didn't move. And then as it slowly started moving forwards, all of the people who worked there seemed to disappear. So when it got to like an hour before our flight, there wasn't anybody available for us to speak to. And we were just in the middle of this sea of people. And that was it. And it slowly, the time just ticked, tick, 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 ticked, until eventually it was like, right, you have missed your flight. And at that point, everybody kind of accepted their fate. I think I was a little bit panicked at the beginning because I still thought we could make it. So I was trying to do things. Once I'd accepted that we were going to miss it, that's very much where my attitude changed to, okay, well, let's look on the plus side. Everybody's hungry. We'll go and get some food. Neil, so Jay remembers Neil, who was on our trip. He just turned around to me and he just started laughing. He went, "Oh, you're only thinking with your stomach." But I'm sure.
Well, I mean, he'd obviously listened to the podcast then, because I know we discussed that. We discussed that a lot. So
nothing new there. But again, looking at those positives and thinking, okay, it was fine. After that, kind of things went a little bit worse. But I'm quite interested, Jay, at that point, what were you feeling from like a customer facing perspective? How was it for you in that situation?
I think as we came through to that tiny area, and I did think this can't be where they normally bring people because it's so small. It was chaotic because we were in one part of the queue and then they seemed to change where they'd put the barriers. So then there was just this influx of people. And I think I got separated from the rest of the group just by maybe like 10 people. So to be honest, I just got my book out and was pretty oblivious to how long we were in the queue because I was just reading. And I did figure there's no way we're going to make this flight as we got through halfway through the queue. There was one point where another gentleman who clearly was going to miss his flight as well, I hadn't noticed that he was in front of me because I'd been reading. And you mentioned about being hungry. So I think at this point I was a bit hangry. And then he realised he couldn't get out because he was trying to talk to someone like you had been. And he started to edge forward again. But I hadn't noticed that he had been in front of me. So I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Exactly how far are you going to keep pushing in front of everyone?" And I don't really know why I did it because, to be honest, we were all in the same situation. But I think at that point, I was like, I'm getting a bit peeved. No one seems to be able to give us answers. But yeah, I think everyone came to the conclusion that, well, I think initially we thought, oh, maybe we'll meet it. Maybe we'll make that flight. But then as we came through and we saw the queue for security, there was just a realization that wasn't going to happen because obviously everyone that had been delayed was also trying to push through to that queue.
So you pretty much got through with about 5 minutes to spare in the end with the plane taking off. But you had to go through security. Like there was just no way you were going to make the flight at that point. And
yeah,
you came back and told me, and you were like, I just need to go to the desk, go to the BA desk and sort this out. And then that's when it kind of went from bad to worse at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah. So at that point, again, there was very much still a process in place for what you do and how you do it. And it's stuff that we're very used to dealing with. Like when these issues arise, we write it in a report, we discuss it amongst all of the representatives. You and I have long conversations. We put processes in place for if anything happens again, we know how to deal with it. So this was something where it was like, okay, well, we're now going to go through security. We've missed our flight, but we're going to go through. When I got to where the desks were to go and have a chat with BA, there was a little bit of a queue. So what I said to everybody, and where I'm really appreciative that I actually had such a good group, was that I said to them, I said, right, there's a Starbucks over there. Why doesn't everybody go and get a coffee? Let me queue up. I'll go and have a chat, and then I'll let everyone know kind of what's going on. So I queued up and I got to the BA desk, and that really is where it went from bad to worse. Because when I got there, it was a case of it. And I know that everybody's allowed a bad day at work. but I was also having a very bad day at work, and I felt like I got attitude straight away from this person. Right, next, what do you want? What are you here for? And I said, look, our flight, our connecting flight was missed. Our flight coming in was delayed. Immigration took a really long time. Is there anything like what's next steps? Basically, like where do we go from here? What's the next flights available? All that sort of stuff. And they turned around and they said, well, when did your flight get in? And I said, oh, it came in at this time. Okay, so it was only 20 minutes delayed. And I said, yeah, but then it took 3 hours to get through. I mean, over 3 hours to get through immigration. I think that's what I want to stress, was that it was completely, lots of people said, oh, Miami's bad, but 3 hours to get through immigration is really, really bad. And they said,
I've had flights before where you've ended up with an hour, like transfer to get your connecting flight. Like, and you think, oh my God, and you're sprinting through the airport with an hour to spare, and you're like, that wasn't an enjoyable experience. But if I look at my ticket and go, I've got 3 hours, I've got 3.5 hours, like I'm going to have time to have a wander around the airport and do duty free. And like, you assume that you're going to have plenty of time with 3 hours. And even if your flight's a little bit delayed, you're still going to make your connecting flight. That's, when you see some people and they've only, you look at some flights and it's like, you've got an hour to get from, and the size of some of the airports. Like if you think of like, Qatar, or you think of, Emirates, like it could take you an hour and a half to get from one gate to the other. So thinking you had over 3 hours is plenty of time normally to make a connecting flight.
Yeah. So what they said to us from the BA side was, well, we got you in at what we would consider to be on time. We don't take responsibility for immigration because it's not our airport. Who are you flying with next? And I said, well, Miami Airlines, or American Airlines. But like it was all linked through yourselves. And they went, it's not our problem. And I think that's what really started to bother me at the beginning, was that it really was phrases like that. That's not our problem. That's nothing to do with us. We can't help you. Like all of those phrases were thrown out quite a lot. And that was really frustrating, because I think in that moment, I just needed someone to be able to go, okay, if you go and have a chat with this person, they'll be able to help you. So I got nowhere with BA. So I went over to American Airlines, which was next. I queued up a little bit. I spoke to them. Their response was, well, who did you fly with? And I said, BA. And this guy really sarcastically was like, well, then it's their problem, isn't it? And I said, but hang on, but they're telling me that, because it's your airport and it's your immigration, that you're now responsible for helping me get onto another flight. And they said, well, we don't take responsibility for immigration. That's just not in our policy. That's not something that we do. And I said, okay, so they've told me to come over here. You're telling me to go over there. Like, can you understand where the confusion is? And he said, and this was the bit I always remember, he said, well, they're lying to you. So, right, okay, fine. So I went back and I got to BA. And after doing it all again, they said to me exactly the same. They said, no, they're lying to you. And at this point, I've got two separate, and I think it was so unprofessional. So I turned to the person at the BA on the third trip, or the second time I was there. And I said, well, can you come with me and have a chat with this person? Because they're saying that you're lying. You're saying that they're lying. No, I can't leave the desk. I can't leave the desk. So I went back to the group at this point. And I'd also, I think it's really important that actually at this stage, I'd reached out to you. We'd been talking over WhatsApp. You were researching all of our possibilities from back in the UK. It's very, very difficult when you're in an airport and when you're abroad to be able to look at every single possibility. So having a team that's in the UK that can sit at a laptop and make some phone calls. And what you were able to do was speak to a representative online and actually obtain some information that I was never going to get from the situation where I was. So I went back to the group, explained everything to them. Now, I'm a big believer, and I'll be interested, Jay, whether this came across, but I think I'm a big believer in communicating with the people that you're with as much as you can. What I don't want to do is go over every 5 minutes and be like, okay, so here's the update. I've just had this conversation, because clearly things change like that. But after a little while, once I've got a general idea of what's going on, that's when I'm quite keen to keep communication with everybody that I'm with. So nobody feels like they're just left alone. I had some people in the group who would normally in their day-to-day jobs be the ones who were in charge. And I think it was definitely a learning experience for them to take a back step, but they did incredibly, and they really did give me the space that I needed.
Yeah, I was on hold at one point for like 2.5 hours. And it's very difficult. Like you're sending me a message saying any updates, and I'm like, still on hold. Like, and the agent would come back to me and be like, well, can I have this piece of information? Then you'd be like, right, can I put you back on hold again? You'd be like, yeah, and then they go off again. And like, I get what you're saying, that it's very difficult to give a group information when you don't have the information, and everything was changing at like a different point. And the interesting thing here was from if you're traveling on your own and you're from a travel perspective, is the problem we had with these tickets is the airline had basically put the group down as a no-show for the flight. And what that means is if you're a no-show for the flight on the way out, your return leg is automatically cancelled. So at this point, we've now got no flights coming home either for the group because they've been cancelled as well. So I'm sitting there having an argument with British Airways. Obviously, it's now 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in the UK. There's nobody in the British Airways office in the UK. So I'm speaking to someone in British Airways in America who is now trying to charge us £7,000 to put us on the next available flight to go out, which is obviously we're arguing because we're thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't our fault that we've missed it. There were other options. Like I actually booked other flights to get the group to Peru in the morning. But the problem with that is if we couldn't get them on a connecting flight, and bearing in mind, they wanted to charge me £7,000 to keep the flights, but actually I had spent just shy of £2,000 to book other flights for the next day. But the problem with that is obviously we'd then lose the connecting flights and we'd have to pay more money to bring the group back home again. And this was the argument I was having with BA. And it was going on and on and on and on. And then luckily, the American Airlines guy did come through in the end slightly, didn't he?
Yeah. I suppose basically what happened was I then went to the group and I spoke to the group. And Jay, I will be really interested to see how it was from your perspective at that point. But I'd spoken to the group at that point. And then I went back to another guy and he was much more helpful. And he was saying, okay, well, if you go back to BA and you can get this bit of information, then we can help you. Right, excellent. So I went back over to BA and they'd all gone home. And then that was the bit where I basically started to go, okay, I'm really struggling with things at the moment. Like this is just starting to feel like very, very stressful. And at that point, I think I'd been awake, or we'd all been awake, because I think I'd left home at about 5 a.m. So I think we worked out we'd been awake for about 18 hours at that point. So we then found this guy and he was very, very helpful. And he turned around to me and he said, oh, well, I can put you all on standby flights. And he went, there's lots of people waiting. He said, but I believe it's worth a chance. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting, because when I spoke to one of your representatives, they said there was nothing that they could do. And he said, well, of course there's something that they can do. Like, we're in front of the computer. Like, we've got the desk, we've got the computer. Like, of course, they just don't want to deal with you. So they're telling you there's nothing they can do because they don't want to deal with you. And he said, it really makes me angry. He said, but I will help you. So what we did was we then all rushed up to him and he put us on this standby flight. So we then went, and I said to everybody, I said, look, here's the situation we're in. We've got a choice where we can try our luck for this standby flight. There's no guarantee we're going to make it, but I really think it's worth a try. And if we don't, then he has said that he can get us booked onto flights the next day. So we then went all the way back through security, and he escorted us all the way through. In fact, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had a little bottle of wine that they'd lifted from the aeroplane, and they'd kept it with them. And when we were walking around, he was like, "Oh, thank you." That person came over and said, "Can you accept gifts? Like, I want to give you this bottle of wine." And he said, he looked around and he said, "Okay, well, just give it a minute." And then when he was escorting us through security, we got about halfway through and he turned around and he went, "Okay, my managers are out of sight now. I'll have it." He put it in his breast pocket. So he took it. It was really nice. So he guided us through. We then went through. We had a little bit of a wait, and we were then waiting for this standby flight. And there was lots of other people in the same position. There was lots of people that we'd seen on our flight. I'll come back to what happened next. But Jay, how was that section for you?
I think you didn't come across as though you were stressed at all, which was very good as a group. It made it feel like there was hope. And I think when you started to have those conversations, we as a group sort of thought, no one, like when it's a stressful situation, no one likes to be observed. So yeah, we'll take ourselves away. And then we started having a look at our insurance documents, working out whether there was something covered in relation to connecting flights. And I think, well, certainly personally, I preferred waiting and being given the information than having dribs and drabs, because that drives me nuts, because it can change, like you say. So I thought that was very helpful. I'm glad I didn't know that they'd actually put us down as a no-show, because that would have definitely caused me more stress. But yeah, so it was pretty chilled, to be honest. I think, like you say, we had a really good group and we all understood that you were doing what you needed to do in order to get us out there. I think we were all frustrated for you in relation to the miscommunication from the workers there. But it was Ray that had the wine, I think, Ray or Nick that gave him the wine. And I think that gave us that little boost, just having one person go, actually, I can help you. And the fact that he did escort her, he didn't need to do that, but he did. And yeah, I think there were certain points where you could tell members of the group needed a little bit of space, because like you say, we'd been awake for so long and it was obviously frustrating. But we had a good group and you caught onto that really quickly. And ultimately, I mean, even at this early stage, I think our part of the group had created this little bond already. Little did we know that there was more to come.
Well, actually, there is one thing that I want to ask you, because I think it is going to be worthwhile for a lot of people listening, and something that you may not take into consideration at the time when you get everything sorted, but definitely something that becomes quite important. So we were all looking, you were all looking, unbeknownst to me, through your insurance documents and working out what was covered and what wasn't covered. What was the bit that you found out with your insurance?
So I had not ticked a box that said that I was covered for misconnecting flights. So I think maybe 2 or 3 people had ticked that box, or more maybe. I know that I didn't, and I don't know how I missed it, because I would have just normally ticked everything. But so personally, I had a bit of a worry, I suppose, as to how much it would cost if I had to pay for the next flight. And then there was a conversation about hotels and things like that as well. But luckily for me, well, we didn't have to do that. But also, luckily, I had one of the girls I knew, and she sort of had already calmed me and said, I can sort you out till we get home anyway. But yes, I would definitely say, make sure you tick all the boxes. It's better to have the just in case than not to have it at all, because you never know. I've never experienced anything like that, and obviously there was more to come, so I would definitely recommend ticking all the boxes.
So I mean, at one point we were looking at getting you on the flight for the following day. Like, I'd already gone through and got you a hotel for that night. You then came back to me and said, hang on a minute, we're on a connecting flight. We're going to try and get on the waiting list for this next one, and we're going to go on standby. So I then went and cancelled the hotel, because it was like, well, you might get on standby now and we've got a hotel booking, so let's cancel that. Obviously, and it was weird because we'd actually had 2 clients who had booked their own flights, but it happened to book the same flights as you, or as us. They had booked business, so they got off the plane first when they landed in Miami and managed just to get through. So I was also in contact with them, because obviously you hadn't spoken to them, Jake, because they kind of were on their own. They had gone through, and they literally managed to make the flight. So I was in contact with them saying, did you make the connecting flight? Which they happen to do. Now, I'm not saying that you need to book business to make sure you make your connecting flight, but obviously in this situation, it did help those 2. But we also had someone who booked the trip late, who was then on a separate ticket to everybody else that was on the group as well. So we had the main group ticket, and then you also had a single ticket with one person on it as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so that made a little bit of a difference in the next stage. What I'd failed to mention beforehand was when I was talking to all the different airlines and I was talking about, okay, well, can you just put us on the next flight? The first response that I got from somebody at BA was there isn't another flight for 2.5 days, basically. And I've definitely gone into it with the impression of, well, we'll just go on a flight tomorrow. It's not the end of the world. Like, we've got contingency days for this reason. And they said, oh, there's not a flight for 2.5 days. So that was very much what was in my mind was, okay, well, there really isn't anything we can do. And that comes down to booking new flights, all this sort of stuff. So anyway, we were going into it with, let's try for the standby flight. So we were waiting. And then they called everybody forwards to go through and get checked onto the flight. So everybody who was supposed to be on that flight, they went on. And then after everybody had boarded, they then announced that there were 2 spaces, I think, was what was left, 2 or 3. And so they started calling names. Now they called this one lady first. And she very loudly said, oh, have you got space for the 2 friends that I'm traveling with? And they said, well, no, we've called your name. And it was quite funny. But she then starts walking back through the airport away from the desk, shouting very loudly, you take all of us or you take none of us. And they went, okay, and called the next person. So they then called the next person who wasn't there, and then they called somebody else. And then they called a member of our group who had been booked onto, so because they booked their flights a little bit later, they were then on a separate ticket. Still same flight, same times, all that sort of stuff, just technically outside the group ticket. So they called this lady in our group, and I just said to her, I said, you've got to get on. I said, you have to get on, because in my head, I'm thinking, okay, it's just, if I have to send everybody one by one, then that's what we'll do. We will slowly filter everyone out. Now, at this point as well, I would like to point out that although we'd spoken about a hotel before, the dilemma was we didn't want to pay for a hotel and then all get onto a flight, and then it would have been a waste of money. But at the same time, I didn't want to not book a hotel and then we don't connect and then we've got nowhere to stay and we have to sleep in the airport. So what I'd done was, obviously with the time difference, I think it must have been like 3-4 in the morning. You'd done everything that you could do. So it was a case of, okay, we'll leave it with me. And I had one of the credit cards, and what I'd done is I typed in all of the details of the hotel rooms that we were going to need, and I was hovering over the booking button because it was 10 to midnight at the time that they were calling the people that could go in that were on standby. And in my head, I'm thinking, if I book this at 1 minute past midnight,
I'm booking for tomorrow night.
I can't book for the day before. So at that point, we won't be able to check in until 3 p.m. So we're going to have to stay at the airport. So at what point do I make the decision to book the hotel? And fortunately, what happened was, I didn't tell any of the group this, but fortunately what happened was Helen, who was in our group, she went forward, got called forward. She then boarded the plane. They then said, nobody else can be called. That's it now. And I immediately, I very quickly removed one room. didn't need to pay for that unnecessarily. Very quickly removed one room and clicked book. And I think I had like 3 minutes to spare. So we then got taken away from that desk. We went to another desk where they said, okay, we'll help you get onto a connecting flight. So I said to the group, right. Well, in fact, actually, by this point, they were said, shall we go and sit down and we'll leave you to queue? I said, yeah, that's fine. So we'd been awake for about 20 hours, 21 hours at this point. We then went to that desk. I'm queuing with 5 people to go before I get to the front of this queue. They all stood up. All the people on the desk stood up and said, oh, we're closing this now. Like that's it. We finished our shift. But we'll take you to the next one. Oh, okay, fine. They said try and keep your place in the queue, which obviously nobody listened to. It was just everybody then walks. It took us 15 minutes to walk through the airport, and I ended up stood at the desk where I first started speaking to someone. So this was what really bothered me, is we ended up outside that Starbucks again, trying to communicate. Anyway, the person there was also very helpful at this point. Clearly the night shift workers were happier. And what they were saying was, okay, well, and he goes, I can get you to Lima, but I'm going to have to split your group. And I said, that's fine. He said, well, half of you will fly through Quito in Ecuador and then go to Lima, and the other half will fly through Houston and then go to Lima. I said, okay, that's fine. You can do that. So I called everybody over. To be fair, we did stop and we did get food at some point as well before that, but I called everybody over, and then it was a case of, okay, right, let's get all the boarding passes sorted with that. And then he suddenly goes, oh, hang on, I can get you all on the same flight. We can get you all to fly through Houston if you want. So, right, fantastic, that would be great. So he put us all onto this Houston flight, and I'd had a conversation with somebody before, and I said, well, where are our bags? Have our bags gone onto the flight that we were supposed to be on? Have they been taken off? And nobody was able to give me a definitive answer. One person had said, no, it was too late. They went on the plane. Another person had said, no, they would never go on the plane because you weren't on the plane. And I said, okay, well, if they're here, can we have them? Because I was thinking if we're going to the hotel, people would like their bags. Nobody could give me a definitive answer until this one guy had said, I tell you what we can do. Whilst I've put you on this flight, I can also check you in. So you don't need to worry about dropping your bags off in the morning. Okay, fantastic. Let's do that. So we then left the airport, got a taxi, went to the hotel. I think we all got like 3-4 hours sleep because we then had to be back at like 8 o'clock. It was minimal, but it was enough for people to be able to shower and get a little bit of kip if they wanted to. We then came back to the airport, made our way through security, sat in the same area that we were, like 8 hours prior. But we knew the bags were in, and everyone was feeling a lot more optimistic. I think that's the big thing. Like everybody was a lot happier. And then the best feeling, we then got on the plane and we then flew all the way from Miami to Houston. And they told us that you have a 6-hour layover in Houston, but by that point nobody cared. It was like, at least we feel
hours,
like we're a step
nothing. Like that's just like
at least you're a little bit closer. And that's kind of what everyone was focusing on. So we land in Houston. We go, quite frankly, we all went to the bar. So that's what we did. They were showing some of the Olympics. I ended up stepping away, start writing up a little bit of the report, go and get some work done. Everybody just had a few drinks at the bar. Jay, what was it like for you being in Houston? How did that feel?
Well, it was a nicer experience than Miami, other than your water bottle issue. But the the people were a lot more friendly, and we were able to get a table, as you say, straight away at the bar. So I think, everyone was positive at Houston because we were that much closer. And as you say, we weren't that bothered about the 5-6 hours. It meant that we could chill out a little bit, and we knew we would sleep on the plane.
And was it something like, did you find it beneficial that we were able to get a hotel even for a few hours? Like, was that something that how was that for you?
I think so, because some of us had caught some Zeds on the floor at the airport, but I don't think we would have had as much if we'd had to stay there. So I certainly appreciated being able to have a shower and just catch a few hours of sleep before we came back. Just feel that little bit more refreshed, don't you? And the hotel wasn't far. I mean, the taxi was questionable, but the hotel wasn't far. So, and we checked in really quickly. So I appreciated that. I think the whole group did, to be honest.
It was something that Keith and I spoke about at the time. And, we were just saying, we were like, it's the right thing to do is let us just take care of organising and getting everybody into a hotel, and let's just get that. So you've got somewhere to, because even if it's just a few hours out, it gives you a little bit of a break from the airport. So we knew that it was something that we kind of were going to do. And we then got to Houston. So that was, definitely feeling like it was steps in the right direction. We had 6 hours, but that was nothing. We had a drink, had some food. And then we get on to we start queuing up to get onto the plane to go to Lima. And I'll always remember there was one guy in the group, and I don't think he'll mind me say. So this guy, Eden, who was in our group, and he was so excited. I mean, he was so confident. We were walking down the the gangway or whatever it is onto the plane, and he's going, "We're going to Lima, that's it." And I said to him, and everyone said, actually, they said, "Don't, because you're going to jinx it." No, I'm not going to. What are you talking about? He was so confident, and he was, having a laugh, having a joke, being a little bit cocky, just enjoying the fact that we were getting on this plane. And we're all laughing. We get on the plane, and it's really warm. Like, it's really hot. So everyone's going, "Oh my God, it's really hot. It's really hot." The plane then taxis out. And this was, so it's important to note. So I was still awake. I think I was running purely on coffee. I must have had, I lost track of how many coffees I'd had that day, or over those couple of days. So we're all on the plane. I'm awake. Jay, I think you were reading your book where you put your eye mask on. Actually, you put your eye mask on.
The eye mask and the neck pillow, and I was having a snooze. So I was a bit oblivious as to how long we'd actually sat there for. It was only when there was a commotion that I thought, "Oh my God, something else." Something else has gone wrong.
Well, that was it. So you put your eye mask on and was very much like, "Okay, I'm going to sleep." And this is always going to be quite amusing, because then, so we started taxiing out, and then we stopped, and then we were there for quite a long time. And then they made an announcement saying that there was a bit of an issue, but we should be on the way soon. And then they said, "Oh, we should be on the way in the next 45 minutes." It's like, okay, well. And then after about an hour, the pilot then comes over the tannoy and basically says, "There's a mechanical issue with the plane, and we're going to have to return it to the airport. And they will put you on a new plane. So you're all going to have to get off, and they'll put you on a new plane." And it was, from my perspective, so I was sat there and I could kind of see everybody. I saw Jay take her eye mask off, almost fully expecting to have landed. And then the realization of, what the fuck are we still doing here?
A few choice words were said, yes.
I had Eden, who just looked like the world had collapsed because he'd been so confident. And I didn't help, because when the pilot made that announcement, I quite loudly went, "Where is he? Where is it? You? You've jinxed it." Poor Ray, bless her, I think just burst into tears. Like, it was a really emotional experience for everybody, because we were expecting obviously to have flown. And from my perspective, I was definitely at the stage at that point where I was thinking, what else? Like, this is laughable. How many things have gone wrong? Like, you couldn't write this. The fact that we've been delayed and we've missed this flight, and we've had this, and then we got on a flight and they had to turn it around. Like, that's just was laughable to me. So we then got off, and they said it was all going to be really, really quick. And then basically it turned out that I think we were in that airport for another 5 hours before we eventually got on the flight. But that flight did then go to Lima. And at that point, we then had a couple of hours in the hotel in Lima, where we then caught up with the person who had flown earlier. And then we also caught up with one person who had flown from New Zealand, so they'd come in. We got to see all of them for like a couple of hours before we went back to the airport to then fly to Cusco. So even when we got to Lima, we only had a couple of hours before we were back in that airport.
Like, it just wasn't, in terms of, you've booked this like amazing adventure, and
adventure it was.
And it was an adventure, just not the one that you were quite anticipating on. What did you learn from that experience? Like, obviously, Jake, I mean, I've had a couple like that in my time. Like, you've never had one quite like that one. They're not a regular occurrence. But I think it's important to understand that it could happen. And what would you do differently now, Jay, in terms of like your packing and what you had with you, if that was ever going to happen to you again?
I would definitely have my toothbrush in my day pack, and even just one set of clothes. At Houston, we managed to find toothbrushes and things like that so that we could at least do that at the airport. But yeah, certainly have something just as a precaution in the day pack. Because it was, as you say, it was just laughable. I mean, there was a point where a couple of us were saying, if we don't get on this plane soon, we're then going to miss the next flight, and then it's just not going to happen. So I think certainly when we got off the plane from Houston, there was a bit of a lull in the hope. But as I say, at no point did I feel that it was out of Jake's control. Like, he was doing everything that he could do. And it was quite nice to just sit back and allow someone else to deal with it. As you said before, there are quite a lot of us that probably would be the ones that would be sorting stuff out. So it was quite nice to be able to just not worry so much. That took a bit of stress off of us. But yeah, there was certainly, Eden had to have a little walk away after getting off that plane again, because I think at that point it was, is this actually going to happen? Is the world trying to tell us something? But it just, as I said before, even at Miami, like, it sort of created this bond within the group, which helped later on. There are a number of us that are not very good at saying when you need that support or you need that help. But because we'd gone through 51 hours of traveling to get to where we needed to be, I think that really helped in the trek itself as well.
What do you think then what do you think the benefits are of booking with a travel company that takes care of everything? Like, in the situation that you were in, as a solo traveler, if you had done that trip on your own, do you think you would have done anything different in terms of what we did? Or, like, would you now think, actually, do you know what? I want somebody else to always deal with these issues for me from now on. Like, where are you sat on the fence with that one?
I don't think we could have done, if we were on our own, I don't think we could have done everything that you guys did. Like you said right at the beginning, there was always someone else dealing with another part. So, and in all, when I've spoken about it to people at home as well, like, the trip in general was so varied. So I think it's a positive to have someone else sort stuff out, but also to have that group. I know that you can go as a solo traveler and you can meet people, but it sounds a bit corny, but our bond was created at that airport right at the beginning when the check-in desks weren't working. So yeah, I would definitely book through a company, an organised group again, rather than on my own.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think, and in terms of the trip itself, obviously now you're back home and you've done the whole trip. How does the start now sit with you in terms of, like, obviously when you first got there, you know, it was obviously high up in the agenda of things because you had just gone through it. But now you're back home, like, where does that sit now as part of the trip?
Oh, it is most definitely still part of the trip, but it's a laughable part of the trip. You know, to be fair, most of the time we saw the funny side of it. As I said before, there were moments where people needed to take their space, and they would have their own, like, walk away for a bit. But in general, we all looked at it on the bright side. Like, we will get there. We will get there. It was only sort of, as I say, when we had to get off that plane at Houston, where I was thinking, is this actually going to happen? But it is still part of my story when I talk about it, because I kind of think it sets you up it set us up for how tough parts of that trek were as well. Like, I consider myself a strong walker and a fit person, and there were points where I cried on that trek, but not, you know, it was more beating myself up because I was struggling a bit. But then there was tears of joy when you reach certain points and you think, I can't believe I've actually managed to do this. So it all forms part of it. Even the pictures, there are pictures of us at the airport. So it's all part of the adventure.
And when you got to Cusco, how long did it take to kind of then get into the trip? Because obviously, you know, it's an exhausting experience going through all that.
Yeah.
But how long was it before you got to Cusco when you kind of went, right, now I'm on the trip. Now I feel like this is the trip?
It was quite a quick turnaround, to be honest. Is when we arrived at Cusco, we were then getting ready to go out and have a look at some Inca ruins and temples and churches. So I think it was, for me anyway, it was automatic, I suppose. I'd already felt like I'd been on a sort of adventure. So to get into that, it was just a blessing that I was able to see these things, because I wasn't sure at Houston whether I would be able to.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, you know, like I say, these things do happen. They don't happen all the time with every flight. Like, I've had a couple of disasters in my time, but, you know, I think it's, you know, if you want to go to these places, I think there has to be a little bit of an expectation that things can go wrong. Don't you think, Jake?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Jake, have you got anything else to add?
No, not loads. I think it is something that, you know, very rarely happens. But I'm really glad that we got the chance to talk about it, because it is the unseen side of adventure travel from our point of view. Like, we don't discuss it all the time publicly. It's because it doesn't happen very often. And actually, I think it is really important to acknowledge that adventure travel is unpredictable. And there's always things that can go a little bit wrong and not necessarily to plan and all that sort of stuff. But it's how you deal with those things that make a big difference. And I think one of the key takeaways to get from this podcast is that, you know, it became part of the adventure. Everything was all right in the end. You know, it wasn't the nicest experience at the time, but as Jay said, it really brought the group together in a way that I don't necessarily think we would have had just because it was so unique. I mean, poor Helen had a bit of survivor's guilt going on with the fact that she ended up flying out, you know, and not staying in Miami with us. And, you know, that was something that she felt like she didn't get to go through with us. So it was really funny how the group all bonded.
I don't think she wanted to get on the flight to begin with, and we were all like, no, you need to get on, because it's one less person to find a space for the next flight. So I think she definitely had that survivor's guilt.
and we always have really good group dynamics on our trips, but I'm just really intrigued to know, like, because of the experience that you guys went through, like, how was that with bonding with the other three that had kind of, the one that had flown in on their own from New Zealand, and then you had the two that had been in business class and made the flight and they had got there? Like, did the group automatically gel back together, or was it kind of like a bit of a, well, we've gone through this experience together, we're tighter than? How was that?
I think when we arrived, they were just intrigued as to what we'd gone through. As I say, so it became part of the adventure, and we informed them of that. But no, I don't think it created a divide. I think it could have, but it didn't. And certainly when we started the actual trek, there became another divide where we had what we called Team A and Team B. But that, again, it wasn't something that created any animosity or anything like that. It was just, we had a faster group and a slower group. So, no, I think certainly on the last day as well, when we'd all gone out for dinner, everyone mixed really well. I think we were I felt lucky that we had a really good group. So no, I don't think it caused a divide at all.
What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I think it was definitely something that could have, because what happened was that the group that I had with me at the airport had been through something that bonded them together. And quite often that happens at the beginning of the trip when you start hiking and trekking. So I knew that was going to happen with everybody anyway, but we'd almost got a little bit of a jump start on it. So there was definitely a part of me that felt, okay, well, this is going to be interesting, because what everybody in the airport learned over those 48 hours and maybe a bit more was when individuals needed a bit of time to themselves, when individuals needed a bit of time to be with everybody, like that group started to pick up on who needed support and when they needed support. And everybody had their moments where they got stressed. As Jay pointed out, I think I managed to keep my calm for almost all of it, until we were going through security at Houston, and somebody tried to throw my very expensive water to go bottle away because there was a tiny bit of water left, and I just just said no. I said, that's ridiculous, I'll drink it. And they said, no, you have to go all the way out of security. I said, okay, and do what? They said, well, you can drink it there. I said, well, why can't I drink it here? It's like a difference of 20 meters, but it's like a half an hour long queue. Anyway, so that was the moment where I kind of lost it. And I said to the group at that point, because they'd all got through, I said, well, I'll catch up with you. Just go and explore, go and do something. And when I got back through, obviously very, very angry, when I got back through that security section again, the whole group were standing around waiting. And it wasn't something that they needed to do. And I think, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, was we always have really good groups. But I got very lucky with having a group that was so understanding of my position and actually being really supportive with the way that they allowed me the freedom to be able to handle things without adding additional stress. And then we're also becoming very supportive towards the end, in lots of ways. So.
Yeah, I think we're very, very fortunate with our groups, and we have some great bucket listers. And I mean, that is what makes the trips. But again, when things go wrong, that also helps those situations massively as well. So, Jay, one last question then from me is, what's next on your bucket list?
A couple of us have been talking about the Sahara trek possibly. So yeah, we might. And I've booked my husband onto the Tanzania cycling trip, although I've told him I'm getting the free UK trip because he wouldn't know about it if it wasn't for me. So. But yeah, it's definitely sparked an interest, a need to do something else, even though it was very tough at times.
And then why should people then book with the Bucket List Company, do you think?
I take my hat off to how efficiently and effectively, so even, like the airport situation was dealt with. As I say, I hardly knew any of what you've sort of spoken about today, which was a lot more than we realised. And we didn't know about that, but we knew enough to make us feel at ease that we were going to get where we needed to be. The guides in general, really knowledgeable, really friendly, really patient. And yeah, I can't rate you guys enough, to be honest.
Well, there's a testimonial for us, Jake, isn't it? That's not a bad shout.
No, it doesn't get much better than that.
So I think the thing is don't let this episode put you off adventure travel, because obviously you'd never go anywhere. It was not a nice experience for the group, or for Jake to deal with, or for us to have to deal with in the office. But at the end of the day, we did go ahead and get everything sorted in the end. The group managed to have their trip. And actually, I do wonder whether or not, it was kind of, because the itinerary for this one was slightly different because of the way the flights were, in the fact that they group had an extra night in Lima at the end of the trip, which we don't normally do on a Machu Picchu trip. Normally, groups will fly from Cusco straight to Lima airport and fly out. But we kind of, even the group in the end, even managed to have some more time in Lima, because kind of they missed that part at the start because they flew straight out to Cusco. So we even managed to sort that out accidentally. That wasn't part of the major planning, but yeah, it was there. Jay, thanks ever so much for coming on today and giving us your thoughts on what happened. Jake, thanks for explaining everything that went on the way. And hopefully your next trip goes a lot smoother at the start than that one does. I'm just glad that my next trip is only a 3-hour flight, and hopefully I won't have that much of a delay on it. But thanks everyone for listening. I normally say, hope you found some inspiration from this, but probably you're not going to get inspired by this podcast, maybe. But it is good to look at things when they do go wrong, because not everything goes to plan. But as long as you get the end result, I think that is the important thing. So I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. But until then, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.